Welcome, dear traveller, to the world asleep. Tonight we drift through Egypt's silent ruins, tracing the ghost of a flame that once illuminated all knowledge, the great library of Alexandria. Once its shelves held every story known to humankind. Now only whispers remain. Beneath the moonlight over the Mediterranean, we listen to the quiet where scholars once spoke to eternity. Imagine the city of Alexandria, standing at the crossroads of empires, its towers rising above the sea and the desert, gleaming with the light of intellect and ambition. In its heart, the library stood as the crown of all human endeavour, a place where the wisdom of the ancient world converged, a sanctuary of scrolls and knowledge, a beacon of what was known and what was yet to be understood. But time, like the tides of the sea, wears away the greatest of creations. Fires came, and with them the embers of forgotten thoughts. Knowledge, it seems, is as fragile as flame, flickering out in the dark. And yet, even as the ashes settled over the stone, the question lingered: how does knowledge vanish, and what remains when it does? We will walk through the ruins of Alexandria tonight, but we will not travel only in space. We will travel in time, descending into the silence that followed the library's disappearance. Beneath the weight of centuries, we will search for answers not in the dust, but in the memory of what was lost. For though the library's walls no longer stand, its light has never truly gone out. It is still with us, scattered like fragments across the earth, in the minds of those who seek, in the stories we share, and in the very air we breathe. As the waves brush the ancient stones, let us listen. For in the quiet of the night, when the stars above shimmer with the secrets of the past, the library speaks, not in words, but in silence, in the spaces between thought, where knowledge is not forgotten, but simply waiting to be found again. Chapter 1. The City of Light and Salt. In the shimmering stretch where the desert breathes into the sea, a city arose like a dream, its bones carved from ambition and vision. Alexandria was not born in silence or stillness, but in the fire of destiny, a city meant to change the course of human history. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, it sat at the crossroads of civilizations, a place where the ancient worlds of Greece, Egypt, Persia and India met to share ideas, trade goods, and create something new. It was a city of light, of salt, and of infinite possibility. From the moment Alexander chose this spot where the Nile's mouth kissed the Mediterranean, Alexandria was meant to be a beacon. The city was designed with precision, its streets laid out like the map of a dream, where knowledge would flow as easily as the tides that washed its shores. Its harbour, with its towering lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided ships and ideas from every corner of the known world, while its sprawling marketplace hummed with the sound of languages and barter. But it was not just trade that brought life to Alexandria. It was the pull of knowledge, a hunger that could not be quenched by material wealth alone. Alexandria's rulers knew that if they were to claim their place in history, it would be through the power of learning, and so they sought to create a sanctuary for all of humanity's wisdom, a place where the stars and the earth could be studied together, where every scroll, every text, every idea could be preserved and built upon. And so the dream of the great library was born. The city's streets were lined with statues of gods and philosophers, with palaces and temples where knowledge was both a divine pursuit and a civic duty. Yet it was the library itself, the heart of Alexandria, that stood at the centre of this grand vision. The Ptolemaic dynasty, led by Ptolemy I and his successors, believed that the library could hold the wisdom of the world, a repository for scrolls from Babylon, India, Greece, Egypt, and beyond. It was an ambitious dream, to collect and preserve the written knowledge of every civilization, to bind together the thoughts and philosophies of those who'd come before. And in that dream, Alexandria became a city not just of commerce, but of learning, a city where the pursuit of knowledge was sacred and where the greatest minds of the ancient world could meet and speak. At the heart of Alexandria stood the Mausion, the temple of the Muses, where scholars gathered like stars around a central sun. Here, in the shadow of the library, great minds like Euclid, Archimedes and Eratosthenes would debate, teach and learn, their voices filling the halls that echoed with the sound of intellect and discovery. The city was not just a place of trade and empire, but a sanctuary for thought, a beacon of human achievement that would last for millennia. The library itself was said to house hundreds of thousands of scrolls, each one a treasure of the human spirit. From the works of Homer and Herodotus to the medical texts of Hippocrates and the philosophical treatises of Plato, the library's shelves held the wisdom of the ages. It was a place where the past and future coexisted, where ideas from across the world could be studied and understood. Scholars travelled from far and wide to study here, drawn not only by the wealth of knowledge, but by the promise of something greater, the idea that in Alexandria one could find the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. But it was not only the scholars who came to Alexandria. The city became a magnet for artists, mathematicians and poets, all eager to share their work and ideas. It was here that Euclid wrote his Elements, laying the foundations for modern geometry. Here, Archimedes made his discoveries in physics and engineering, and Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy. The city's libraries and schools were not merely places of study. They were centres of creation, where knowledge was not just preserved, but expanded, tested, and transformed. And yet, even as the city flourished in its early years, there was an undercurrent of tension. The pursuit of knowledge was not always a peaceful endeavour. Alexandria was a city caught between worlds, between Greek rationalism and Egyptian mysticism, between the pragmatic needs of empire and the idealistic pursuit of wisdom. The library in particular was a symbol of this tension, a place where the collision of cultures and ideologies would sometimes clash as much as they would converge. The Egyptians, with their deep spiritual traditions, looked at the Greeks' rational approach to knowledge with a sense of skepticism. To them, wisdom was not something that could be contained in books or scrolls, but something that was understood through experience, through ritual, and through the mysteries of the universe. The Greeks, in turn, often viewed the Egyptians' approach as overly mystical, dismissing their sacred knowledge as unscientific. And yet, both sides were drawn to Alexandria, for it was a place where both traditions could coexist, even if uneasily. The Ptolemaic rulers, recognizing the potential of this fusion, attempted to bridge the gap between the two worlds. They invited scholars from all corners of the empire to come to Alexandria, to contribute to the library and to share their knowledge. In doing so, they created an environment where ideas could flow freely, where the barriers between East and West, between reason and spirituality, could be blurred. It was an idealistic vision, one that sought to unite the best of every civilization into a single, harmonious whole. But in practice, Alexandria was not always a place of harmony. The city was built on the labour of slaves, its wealth derived from the empire's expansion and conquest. Tensions between the ruling Ptolemies and the local Egyptian population were not uncommon, and the presence of so many foreign scholars only added to the strain. There were protests and uprisings, as those who lived in the shadow of the library often found themselves excluded from its intellectual bounty. The library, for all its grandeur, was a symbol of an empire that was as much about power as it was about knowledge. Still, Alexandria endured. It remained the centre of learning, attracting scholars from across the ancient world, each one eager to add their voice to the symphony of thought that echoed through its streets. The library stood as a beacon of human achievement, a testament to the idea that knowledge could transcend borders, religions, and empires. In the centuries to come, the city would face invasion, destruction, and fire. But the dream of Alexandria, a dream of knowledge, discovery, and unity, would never fully die. As we drift through the ruins of this great city, let us remember that Alexandria was not just a place, but an idea. The idea that through learning, we can transcend the boundaries that divide us, that through knowledge, we can reach towards something greater. The fire of the library may have faded, but its light still lingers, a faint glow on the horizon, waiting to be rekindled. And now, as the sun sets over the Mediterranean, we move closer to the heart of this ancient dream. For the library's story is not just one of loss, but of rebirth. And in the next chapter, we will follow the dream's first steps as the Ptolemies sought to create the greatest collection of knowledge the world had ever seen. The echo of their ambition still resonates in the air, calling us to dive deeper into the history of the library and into the heart of Alexandria itself. Chapter 2: The Dream of Ptolemy. In the soft glow of the rising sun, Alexandria's streets were bathed in gold. The city was still young, its marble buildings gleaming under the bright light. At the heart of it all stood the vision of a ruler whose name would echo through time, Ptolemy I. Born in Macedonia, a general in Alexander the Great's army, Ptolemy I saw in Alexandria not just a new city, but a new world. He understood that this was a place where the threads of civilization could be woven together, where the West and East could meet not through war, but through the exchange of knowledge, philosophy, and thought. Ptolemy's vision for Alexandria was one of grandeur and purpose, a city not only of power, but of intellect. And at the center of this vision was the creation of a place unlike any the world had known, a library that would stand as a monument to the gathering and preservation of all human knowledge. The Great Library, as it would come to be known, was not merely a place for scrolls and books, but an entire institution, a symbol of Alexandria's ambition to be the intellectual capital of the ancient world. The library was meant to be more than just a building. It was an idea, a dream of a space where the greatest minds from across the known world could gather, where knowledge could be shared and expanded. Ptolemy's vision was one of unity, bringing together the vast knowledge of Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond into a single space, a single collective mind that could define the future. But to build such a dream, one needed more than just land, stone, and scrolls. One needed ambition, power, and perhaps most importantly, a desire to leave an indelible mark on history. Ptolemy had all of these in abundance. He began by establishing the Mausion, the Temple of the Muses, which would house the library itself. The Mausion was not just a building, it was a sanctuary for thought, a place where scholars could come together, not only to read, but to engage in deep intellectual inquiry. It was a space where philosophers, mathematicians, poets, astronomers, and scientists would converge, each contributing their unique perspectives, and together shaping the course of human understanding. In Ptolemy's Alexandria, learning was not confined to the walls of the Museion alone. It permeated the entire city. The streets were filled with the sounds of scholars debating, traders bringing in rare manuscripts from faraway lands, and students eager to learn from the greatest minds of the time. Alexandria became the intellectual centre of the ancient world, attracting thinkers from Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and Egypt. The Ptolemies did not just welcome scholars, they sought them out. They offered financial support, shelter, and access to the city's resources. They even provided funds for the purchase of scrolls, allowing the library to rapidly expand its collection. But this was not enough for Ptolemy. His dream was to collect not just the works of Greek and Egyptian scholars, but the knowledge of all civilizations. He sent agents far and wide to gather scrolls, to translate works from Persian, Sanskrit and Hebrew, and to bring them to Alexandria. It is said that the library's collection grew so large that it became a reflection of the world itself. Every major work in the known world was found there, from the epic poems of Homer to the mathematical theories of Euclid. The library was in many ways a reflection of the Ptolemy's ambition, a desire to gather and preserve every thought, every idea, every word ever spoken by humankind. In the library's halls, knowledge was organised, stored and protected. The works were carefully catalogued, each scroll meticulously transcribed, every book placed in its rightful place. This was not simply a collection of knowledge, it was an archive of the human experience, a repository of the world's wisdom and stories. The Ptolemy's ambition was to create a space where knowledge could be passed down from generation to generation, where future thinkers could build upon the ideas of the past. But as much as the Ptolemies sought to collect knowledge, they also sought to control it. The library was not just a place for the free exchange of ideas, it was a tool of power. The Ptolemies understood that knowledge was not only a means of understanding the world, but a means of shaping it. The library was a symbol of their intellectual dominance, a way of asserting their authority over the world of thought. It was not just about preserving the past, it was about controlling the future, and in many ways this control over knowledge would become the Ptolemies' greatest legacy. For while the library itself would one day fade into legend, the Ptolemies' influence over the intellectual landscape of the ancient world would endure for centuries to come. The question, however, remains: why did such a grand vision disappear? How did a library that contained so much knowledge, so many ideas and so many discoveries slip quietly into legend? The answer, as we will see, lies not just in the fires that burned the library's scrolls, but in the shifting tides of history, in the fall of empires, the rise of new faiths, and the eventual decay of a world that no longer saw knowledge as the path to power. But before we can explore the fires that destroyed the library, we must first understand the dream that created it. For the library's story is not just one of loss and destruction, it is a story of creation, of ambition, and of the human desire to preserve the greatest achievements of the mind. In the next chapter, we will walk through the corridors of the library, listening to the voices of the scholars who lived and worked there. We will imagine what it must have been like to study in the presence of such great minds, minds that shape the very course of human history. And as we walk, we will consider the great question: how does knowledge, once gathered, slip away? How does it vanish from memory, leaving only whispers in the wind? As we leave the heart of Alexandria behind, the library's story beckons us onward, deeper into the mystery of what was lost. Chapter 3: Voices in the Stacks. The echo of knowledge once filled the grand halls of the Library of Alexandria, resonating like the hum of a vast and intricate instrument. It was not a silent sanctuary, but a place alive with debate, with voices both young and old, rich in wisdom and eager for discovery. Scholars from all corners of the known world came to Alexandria, bringing with them their scrolls and ideas, their insights and contradictions. It was here that the intellectual soul of the ancient world found its home, and it was in these voices that the spirit of Alexandria truly lived. To walk through the corridors of the library was to step into a living tapestry of thought. Imagine, if you will, the rows upon rows of scrolls neatly arranged on wooden shelves, each one containing a universe of knowledge waiting to be uncovered. The air would have been thick with the scent of papyrus and ink, the faint glow of oil lamps flickering in the corners, casting shadows on the walls where scholars pored over ancient texts. In this space, time was measured not in minutes or hours, but in ideas, each scroll a stepping stone, each debate a building block, and each discovery a new path leading into the unknown. The library was not just a repository of knowledge, it was a place where knowledge was actively created. This was not simply the work of copying texts or preserving the past. In Alexandria, knowledge was being forged anew. It was here that Euclid, the father of geometry, worked on his elements, defining the principles that would shape mathematics for centuries. It was here that Archimedes, that brilliant and eccentric mind, pondered the mysteries of buoyancy, the laws of motion, and the concept of the lever. Here too, Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, his calculations laying the groundwork for the geography of the modern world. But the library was not only a place of discovery in the sciences, it was also a sanctuary for the great minds of philosophy and literature. It was here that the works of Homer were studied, not just as ancient texts, but as the foundation for understanding the human experience. Plato's Republic was discussed in quiet corners, its ideas of justice and governance debated passionately by scholars from all backgrounds. Aristotle's Poetics and Metaphysics were read aloud, discussed in hushed tones, their concepts of logic and ethics shaping the minds of all who encountered them. The scholars who gathered in the library were not merely researchers, they were philosophers, poets, mathematicians, astronomers, and historians. It was a melting pot of intellectual pursuits, where the boundaries between disciplines blurred. In Alexandria, the great minds of the ancient world came together, exchanging ideas, challenging each other's views, and contributing to a collective understanding that transcended borders and traditions. Each scholar, whether from Greece, Egypt, Persia, or India, brought with them a unique perspective, and each one left their mark on the intellectual landscape of Alexandria. Yet, for all its brilliance, the library was not immune to the tensions of its time. As much as it was a place of learning, it was also a battleground of ideas. The intellectual climate of Alexandria was far from harmonious, with rivalries emerging between different schools of thought. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had founded and nurtured the library, often found itself caught between the philosophical traditions of Egypt and Greece, both of which claimed their place in the intellectual framework of the city. The Greeks sought to define knowledge in rational terms, while the Egyptians held on to a more mystical understanding of the world, believing that the secrets of the universe could be found through divine insight and hidden wisdom. This tension between rationalism and mysticism played out not only in the halls of the library, but in the streets of Alexandria itself. And yet, despite the conflicts, the library remained a beacon of intellectual inquiry, where scholars from all walks of life could gather and discuss the great questions of existence. The voices in the stacks were not just the voices of the learned few, they were the voices of a civilization united by the desire to understand the world and its mysteries. From the brightest minds of the ancient world to the humble student eager to learn, all were drawn to the library, seeking answers, questioning assumptions, and contributing to the ever-expanding pool of human knowledge. But the library was not without its challenges. Its very success, its ability to attract the greatest minds of the age, also made it a target. The more it grew, the more it drew the attention of those who sought to control it. The Ptolemies, for all their vision, were still rulers of an empire, and they knew that knowledge was power. The library became not only a place of learning, but a tool of statecraft. The Ptolemies sought to use it to solidify their power, to control the intellectual landscape of the Mediterranean world, and to establish Alexandria as the centre of learning and culture. This desire for control over knowledge was not unique to the Ptolemies. Throughout history, rulers and empires have sought to control the flow of information, to shape the narrative of their time. The burning of books, the censorship of ideas, and the suppression of dissenting voices have all been part of the human story. In Alexandria, the library was not immune to these forces. As it grew in stature, it became entangled in the politics of empire and religion, and the struggle for control over knowledge grew more intense. The early days of the library were marked by a spirit of openness, of intellectual exchange and collaboration. But as the centuries passed, the forces of power, politics, and religion began to close in. In the face of these pressures, the voices in the stacks grew quieter, as scholars were forced to navigate the shifting currents of political and religious power. In this increasingly turbulent environment, the library itself began to change. No longer just a place of open inquiry, it became a more controlled and guarded space, with access to its scrolls and manuscripts restricted by those in power. The transition from an open sanctuary of knowledge to a controlled space of intellectual property was a slow one, but it marked a turning point in the history of the library. The tension between open inquiry and the control of knowledge would ultimately be one of the factors that contributed to the library's eventual decline. And yet, despite the political pressures that closed in, the library remained a symbol of the unquenchable human desire to know, to understand, and to explore the mysteries of the world. As we reflect on the voices that once filled the halls of the library, we are reminded of the fragility of knowledge. What was once shared freely, in the spirit of discovery and intellectual exchange, became something to be guarded and controlled. The words of the great thinkers, Euclid, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, were not only their own, but belonged to the world. Their ideas, their discoveries were meant to be shared, to be passed down through generations, to be built upon by those who came after. And yet, as time passed, those voices faded into silence. The Library of Alexandria, in many ways, was a reflection of the human condition, the constant tension between the desire for knowledge and the forces that seek to control it. It is a reminder that knowledge, once gathered, can never truly be preserved. It is a living, breathing entity, always changing, always evolving, and always at risk of slipping into the dark corners of history. And yet, even as the voices in the stacks faded, their legacy remained. The ideas that were born in the Library of Alexandria continue to shape the world today. The discoveries made by the scholars who worked there in geometry, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy have become the foundation upon which modern science and thought are built. The library may have been lost to time, but the light it ignited continues to burn in the hearts of those who seek knowledge. As we move forward, let us remember those voices in the stacks. Let us remember the dream that created the library, the spirit of inquiry that drove the scholars of Alexandria to seek the truth. And as we look ahead, let us continue the work they began, carrying their knowledge with us as we explore the world and the mysteries that lie within it. But the story does not end here. In the next chapter, we will begin to trace the first signs of the library's eventual demise, not in a single blaze, but in the gradual erasure of knowledge, the slow crumbling of a world that could no longer sustain its greatest intellectual achievement. As the pages of history turn, we will begin to see the first ashes fall from the library's shelves and the beginning of a silence that would echo through the ages. The flame of the library may have flickered, but the wind has carried it far, and its memory still burns bright. And as we journey onward, we will uncover the forces that sought to dim that light, and the legacy they left behind. Chapter 4. The First Ashes. History has a strange way of sweeping away its own dust. Events unfold in waves, sweeping through civilizations like a storm, and what remains is often only a pale memory, a whisper carried on the wind. The Library of Alexandria, once a beacon of human understanding, was no exception. Though it began as a place of unbridled intellectual ambition, its story is one of gradual erosion, not only through the flames of war but through the quiet shift of time itself. The first great fire to touch the library was not one of rage, but of opportunity, an accident, or perhaps a consequence of circumstance. In 48 BCE, as Julius Caesar's forces laid siege to Alexandria, a fire broke out in the city, sparked by the flames of the Roman fleet. Alexandria's harbour was a labyrinth of warehouses, each filled with goods from every corner of the ancient world. But these were no ordinary goods. They were knowledge, stored on scrolls of papyrus, carried from the far reaches of the Mediterranean, Asia and Africa. As the flames crept through the city's narrow streets and alleys, they reached the warehouses that housed the library's treasures. The scrolls were not only the intellectual property of Alexandria, but of the world itself. They were in many ways the heart of the ancient world's knowledge, accumulated over centuries by scholars from all cultures. As the fire raged, much of the library's collection was consumed. The flames that tore through the city's walls didn't discriminate. They ravaged not just the material wealth of Alexandria, but its intellectual soul. Caesar himself, though intent on winning the war and securing his empire, could hardly have known that the destruction of the library would be a turning point in the intellectual history of the world. It is said that the flames of war consumed not only the library, but also the very idea of a space where all human knowledge could be gathered, preserved, and shared. In the midst of a violent conflict, Alexandria's most revered treasure, the light of learning, was dimmed, and the heart of the ancient world's intellect was lost. But even as much of the library's collection was destroyed, the idea of knowledge did not die. The pursuit of wisdom, like the fire that had once consumed it, could not be extinguished so easily. Alexandria, after all, was still a city that stood at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. The flame of the library would not be snuffed out by one fire. Even in the aftermath of Caesar's siege, the city continued to attract scholars, artists and thinkers from every corner of the known world. In the years that followed, the Ptolemies, though weakened by war and internal strife, sought to rebuild the library and restore Alexandria to its former glory. Under Ptolemy Sforza, the library's collection began to grow again, though not to the grand scale it once held. The Mausion, the temple to the Muses, continued to serve as a haven for scholars. New manuscripts were brought in from all corners of the world, and the scholars of Alexandria resumed their work in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Yet the library was never the same. The fire had taken more than just the physical scrolls. It had taken something intangible, something irreplaceable, the collective sense of permanence and security that had once surrounded Alexandria as the intellectual centre of the world. As the centuries passed, the idea of the library continued to flicker in the minds of those who came after. Scholars and historians would write about the great library, but few could truly understand the depth of what had been lost. The fire that had consumed the collection in Caesar's time had become a symbol of the fragility of human knowledge. The idea of a repository for all human wisdom, once so bold and alive, now seemed a distant dream, a relic of a more hopeful time. And yet, despite the ravages of war, destruction and time, Alexandria's spirit of intellectual inquiry continued to thrive. The city would survive the Romans, the rise of Christianity, and the collapse of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It would endure as a city of learning, though its intellectual legacy was now spread thin across the Mediterranean world. But even in the face of the library's near destruction, Alexandria's thirst for knowledge did not cease. The second great loss, however, came not from fire but from a force far more insidious: the slow erosion of intellectual freedom. The rise of Christianity, which began to dominate the Roman Empire during the 4th century CE, brought with it a new set of ideas about knowledge, learning and truth. In this new world, the library's pagan and philosophical roots seemed increasingly irrelevant, even dangerous. As the empire embraced Christianity, Alexandria found itself at a crossroads. The clash between ancient pagan thought and the new Christian faith created a divide within the city. The ancient temples of Egypt, once revered as centres of learning, began to fall out of favour. The gods of Egypt, once seen as the guardians of knowledge, were now condemned as false idols. And in this climate, the Library of Alexandria, once a place of sacred learning, found itself increasingly marginalised. In 391 CE, the Archbishop Theophilus ordered the destruction of the Serapeum, the last remaining sanctuary of pagan thought in Alexandria. The Serapeum had once housed part of the library's collection, and its destruction was a symbolic blow to the intellectual heritage of the city. Theophilus justified the act as necessary for the preservation of Christian orthodoxy, but for many, it marked the beginning of the end for Alexandria's golden age of learning. The destruction of the Serapeum did not mark the end of the library's story, but it did signal the beginning of a new era, one in which knowledge would be increasingly controlled, shaped, and restricted by the rising tide of religious orthodoxy. The ancient ideas of the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians, once so freely shared and discussed, now became subjects of debate and, in some cases, suppression. Alexandria, once the shining beacon of intellectual freedom, began to fade into a quieter, more constrained world. As we stand in the ruins of the library today, we see not just the remnants of a building, but the legacy of a battle fought not only with fire, but with ideas. The fire that raged in 48 BCE was only the first of many fires that would touch the library's legacy. The next fires would be ideological, fought with words and dogma rather than flames and steel. And yet, even in the ashes of these fires, there is still a faint light. The library's story did not end in destruction. It lives on in fragments, in the ideas it birthed, and in the scholars who carried its legacy forward. The quest for knowledge, for understanding, for truth, these are the things that cannot be burned, forgotten, or erased. They are carried in the hearts and minds of those who seek. In the next chapter, we will move beyond the ashes and into the silence that followed the library's decline. What became of Alexandria's intellectual soul after the flames had died down? What remained, if anything, to carry the torch of knowledge into the centuries that followed? We will seek the answers to these questions, tracing the quiet echoes of Alexandria's once great flame as it slowly dispersed across the world. Chapter 5. The Second Silence. Time moves differently when knowledge is forgotten. It seeps away like sand through the fingers of history, leaving only traces, not of what was, but of what could have been. The echoes of Alexandria's greatness did not fade overnight. They lingered in the quiet spaces, like distant memories half remembered in dreams. But after the library's first destruction, there was an unsettling silence. In the wake of fire, neglect, and philosophical conflict, Alexandria's spirit of intellectual inquiry began to dim. The Ptolemies had laid the foundation for something remarkable. The library, once the beating heart of the ancient world's intellectual pursuits, was a place where knowledge flowed like water through the streets. But as centuries passed, the river slowed to a trickle. The second silence did not come with a great and dramatic event like the fire set by Julius Caesar's forces, nor did it come with the destructive force of religious zeal. Instead, it arrived gradually, like a slow, unacknowledged tide creeping over the shores of Alexandria. It was during the 4th and 5th centuries CE that the most profound shifts in Alexandria's intellectual landscape began to unfold. The once flourishing city of learning found itself under siege, not from soldiers, but from ideologies. Christianity, the rising faith of the Roman Empire, began to take root in Alexandria, just as it did throughout much of the ancient world. The clash between the ancient rational knowledge preserved in the library and the new spiritual beliefs heralded by Christianity became the focal point of Alexandria's intellectual and religious struggles. As Christianity grew in influence, the philosophical traditions that had defined Alexandria began to come under scrutiny. The great schools of philosophy, those that had been home to the teachings of Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient Greek philosophers, found themselves at odds with the new Christian orthodoxy. The intellectual pursuits of the past, once embraced by the rulers of Alexandria, were now increasingly seen as heretical. In this environment, knowledge itself became a battlefield. The Ptolemies, who had once valued knowledge above all else, had long since faded from power, and Alexandria was now a city under the control of the Roman Empire, with shifting political and religious ideologies that could no longer afford to support the open exchange of ideas. The library's once vibrant halls became quieter, and the scrolls that once filled its shelves were moved to other places, or, worse still, left to deteriorate. The last traces of Alexandria's intellectual soul were slipping away, as the forces of dogma and belief began to choke out the flame of reason and inquiry. But the arrival of Christianity was not the sole force that silenced Alexandria. The rise of the Byzantine Empire following the division of the Roman Empire further deepened the ideological divide. Alexandria's long-standing intellectual tradition was challenged not just by the rise of religion, but by the emergence of new political powers that sought to reshape the city's cultural identity. The library and the ideas that it housed became the focal point of this struggle. The rise of Christianity was not simply a matter of new religious practices, it was, in many ways, an existential challenge to the very concept of knowledge that the library had once represented. For those who embraced the new faith, the pagan knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Egyptians was no longer considered sacred. It was seen as inferior, even dangerous, an affront to the true spiritual knowledge that Christianity had to offer. The library, with its vast collection of scrolls and texts from all corners of the ancient world, became a symbol of the old order, a world of reason, science, and philosophy that was slowly being eclipsed by a new, spiritually grounded worldview. In the face of this intellectual and spiritual shift, the library's continued existence seemed increasingly untenable. As the centuries passed, Alexandria's former glory gradually faded. The intellectual vibrancy that had once defined the city became a distant memory, as political and religious forces reshaped its identity. The decline of the library was mirrored by the decay of the city itself. The rise of the Byzantine Empire, with its Christian orthodoxy and emphasis on religious knowledge, led to the closure of the great pagan schools, and many of the city's intellectuals either fled or abandoned Alexandria's intellectual heritage altogether. But even as Alexandria's political power waned and its intellectual traditions fell into disuse, a new intellectual tradition began to take root elsewhere in the world. The knowledge once housed in Alexandria began to disperse, carried by scholars, refugees, and travellers to places like Rome, Constantinople, and Baghdad. The flame of Alexandria was not extinguished entirely, it was merely scattered across the world, waiting to be rekindled in different forms and contexts. The second silence, though marked by loss and decay, also marked the beginning of something else, something quieter, something subtler, but no less significant. It was the beginning of the spread of Alexandria's knowledge to new places, where it would take on new forms and influence the minds of new generations. Though the library itself was gone, its influence would continue to reverberate through the centuries. For centuries after the fall of Alexandria, the memory of its great library would persist. Its loss would be mourned, but its ideas would live on. The Renaissance, centuries later, would see the rebirth of classical knowledge, as scholars rediscovered the ancient texts that had once been housed in the library. In the West, the great thinkers of the Renaissance would return to the works of Aristotle, Plato and Euclid, and in doing so they would revive the intellectual tradition of Alexandria. But the process was slow. The once great library of Alexandria was gone, and its pages had been scattered to the winds, and yet Alexandria's influence remained. The echoes of the voices in the stacks, the debates, the discoveries, the endless pursuit of knowledge continued to shape the world, even after the great silence had fallen. The world of ancient Alexandria may have passed, but its ideas lived on, carried by those who sought to rebuild what had been lost. But for now, in this chapter of our journey, we remain in the quiet aftermath of that second silence, a silence that stretched across the centuries. What remained of Alexandria's great intellectual fire was now buried beneath the weight of time and ideological conflict. The scrolls were gone, the scholars had moved on, and the city that had once been the shining light of human knowledge had faded into the background of history. Still, even in the silence, the memory of Alexandria's brilliance lingered. The pages of history might have turned, but the light of knowledge continued to shine faintly in the hearts of those who still remembered. In the next chapter, we will follow the trail of these fragments of wisdom as they travel across the world, carried by scholars, travellers, and refugees. For though the library may have been lost, the ideas it contained would continue to shape the world in unexpected ways. As we leave behind the ashes and silence of Alexandria, let us look forward to the rediscovery of its light and the journey of its knowledge across the globe. Chapter 6. The Final Flame. The final chapter of Alexandria's storied legacy is not written in the same bold, brilliant strokes as its early years. There is no monumental event to mark its end, no single fire that reduced it to ash. Instead, it was a slow, creeping silence, a quiet fading that stretched over centuries as empires rose and fell, and the knowledge that once illuminated the world dimmed under the weight of time and circumstance. But in the story of the library there is one more flame that needs to be told, the fire that sealed its fate. The year was 642 CE, and Alexandria had already experienced its share of transformation. By this time, the city had been part of the Byzantine Empire, and its once glorious intellectual tradition was fading into the past. The library, though not entirely destroyed, had been reduced to remnants over the centuries, with many of its scrolls and texts lost in the chaos of earlier conflicts, and its grandeur diminished by political and religious shifts. Still, even as Alexandria's physical beauty decayed, the spirit of the library remained embedded in the minds of the people, a symbol of what had been lost and what might still be recovered. Then, in 642 CE, Alexandria was confronted with a new force, one that would ultimately bring a definitive end to the city's ancient intellectual soul. The armies of Islam, led by the general Amr ibn al-As, swept through Egypt, part of the rapid expansion of the caliphate across the Mediterranean world. The Byzantine Empire had already begun to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions, and Alexandria, once a proud Roman city, was now a prize to be claimed by the growing Islamic Empire. As the city fell to the conquerors, a legend was born, a legend that would echo through history, adding yet another layer of mystery to the library's final days. According to some versions of the story, Caliph Omar, upon hearing of the remnants of the library, ordered its final destruction. The famous decree, still repeated in popular imagination, goes as follows: "If the books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are dangerous. Destroy them." This image of the library's final flames is one that has burned its way into the collective memory, the idea of the library being consumed by fire one last time, as its vast knowledge was obliterated by an edict of religious conformity. But did this event really happen? Many historians argue that the library by this time had already been reduced to fragments, its scrolls dispersed or destroyed by earlier fires, invasions and neglect. The tale of Caliph Omar's decree may be more legend than fact, a symbolic narrative created to embody the loss of the library, a loss that was not just physical, but also intellectual. For those who tell this story, the fire symbolizes the end of a world where knowledge was once free, a final act of destruction that closed the door on the golden age of Alexandria. The reality of Alexandria's intellectual decline is more complex. By the time of the Islamic conquest, the library had been scattered, its contents spread across the empire in various forms. What remained of the collection was, for the most part, locked away in the minds of the few who had carried the knowledge of the ancients forward. What could not be saved in the physical realm was carried by scholars who fled, taking with them the teachings of Plato, Aristotle and Euclid to faraway places like Baghdad, where the Abbasid Caliphate was in the midst of its own intellectual renaissance. The Islamic world would come to preserve and expand upon many of the works that had once been housed in Alexandria. The great Islamic philosophers, mathematicians and scientists would build upon the foundation laid by the Greeks, and in many ways the spirit of Alexandria would be reborn, though not in Alexandria itself. And yet, despite these efforts, the myth of the final flame remains a powerful symbol of loss. The idea that Alexandria's last great treasure, its library, was destroyed in a single decisive act has a kind of finality to it. It suggests that knowledge can be wiped away, erased, and rendered irrelevant in the blink of an eye. It is a story that resonates deeply with our own fears about the fragility of knowledge, the potential for civilization's most cherished ideas to be lost forever in the chaos of war or religious upheaval. But there is another side to the story, one that suggests that knowledge, once written, cannot be so easily destroyed. Even if the library was physically reduced to rubble, its impact remained. Alexandria's intellectual legacy did not vanish with the fire. It lived on in the minds of the people who had studied there, and in the copies and translations of its great works that spread across the ancient world. The library's contents, although lost to history, were never fully extinguished. The light it had once sparked in the minds of scholars continued to burn in new places, in new forms. In the centuries that followed, the memory of the Library of Alexandria became not just a symbol of loss, but of the enduring power of knowledge. Its destruction marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of human thought. The ideas that had been nurtured in the library would live on in the works of the great Islamic scholars, in the rediscovery of ancient texts during the Renaissance, and in the scientific and philosophical revolutions that would shape the modern world. What remained after the final flames were extinguished was not only the memory of the library, but the idea that knowledge, once shared, cannot be permanently lost. The act of destruction may have been an attempt to erase the past, but the library's true legacy was that it had already been spread far and wide. It had taken root in the minds of those who had learned from it, who had written about it, and who had passed on its wisdom to future generations. In this sense, the final flame that destroyed Alexandria's library was not truly its end. It was merely the final chapter in a story that continues to unfold. The wisdom of the ancients, once confined to the shelves of a single library, became the property of all humanity, scattered like seeds across the globe. Each new generation would find its own way of reconnecting with the knowledge that had been passed down to them, and in doing so, they would carry the torch of Alexandria forward into new realms of discovery. As we sit here in the stillness of the night, we can look back on Alexandria's history not as a tale of loss, but as one of resilience. The fire may have consumed the library's physical form, but its spirit endures in the knowledge that continues to shape the world. We must remember that the library was never just a collection of scrolls. It was a symbol of humanity's thirst for understanding, of our desire to explore the mysteries of the universe and our place within it. And so, as we let the flames of Alexandria's final destruction fade into the distance, we turn our attention to the echoes that remain, the ripples of knowledge that have spread far beyond the shores of the Mediterranean. In the next chapter, we will explore how the fragments of the library's legacy continue to reverberate through history, carried by scholars, travellers, and thinkers who refuse to let the light of Alexandria's wisdom be extinguished. The final flame may have marked the end of an era, but it was also the spark that ignited the next chapter in the story of human knowledge. The journey of the library's legacy did not end in the ashes. It began anew, waiting to be rediscovered by those who still seek the light. Chapter 7: The Echo of Paper and Flame. The story of the Library of Alexandria, like many great tales of loss and preservation, does not end in silence. Though the shelves of the library have long since crumbled, and the scrolls that once held the collective wisdom of the ancient world have faded into dust, the library's legacy is anything but gone. Knowledge, like fire, never fully dies. It simply takes on new forms, flickering in the minds of those who carry it forward. After the library's destruction, first by Caesar's flames and later by religious and political forces, the knowledge that it contained did not vanish entirely. Much like the scattered ashes of a fire that once roared, fragments of its wisdom were carried by the winds of time, leaving their imprint across the world. And though the library itself may have been consumed, its essence was far from extinguished. The loss of the library was a devastating blow to the intellectual heart of the ancient world, but the remnants of its spirit lived on in those who had studied its scrolls and walked its halls. The texts that were saved, copied, or translated continued to circulate throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The works of Euclid, Archimedes, and Plato did not remain confined to Alexandria. They were carried to the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire and later to the Islamic caliphates, where they were preserved, interpreted, and built upon. The scholars of Alexandria had been in constant contact with other centres of learning in the ancient world, from Babylon to Athens, from India to Persia. They had sent copies of their manuscripts to distant libraries, ensuring that even as the physical library burned, its intellectual reach was far from limited. As the centuries passed, Alexandria's knowledge would continue to inspire, influence, and shape the intellectual revolutions of the future. One of the most significant periods in which Alexandria's legacy was resurrected occurred during the Islamic Golden Age, which began in the 8th century CE. Scholars in the Muslim world, particularly in places like Baghdad, began translating Greek and Roman texts into Arabic. These scholars, inspired by the works of the ancients, preserved much of what had been lost in the fires that had ravaged Alexandria. The works of Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Euclid were translated, studied, and expanded upon by the great Islamic minds of the time. It was through the efforts of scholars in cities like Baghdad and Cordoba that much of the knowledge of the ancient world was passed on to Europe. The Islamic Golden Age was a period of intellectual flourishing, and it was during this time that many of the ideas that had once been housed in the Library of Alexandria were reintroduced to the West. From astronomy to mathematics, from philosophy to medicine, the the knowledge of Alexandria was reborn in a new context, influencing scholars like Avicenna, Al-Razi and Al-Farabi. This intellectual renaissance did not stop with the Islamic world. In the 12th century, as Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, the works of Aristotle and other Greek philosophers began to be reintroduced to the West through the translations of Arabic texts. The famed philosopher Thomas Aquinas, among others, began to incorporate these ancient ideas into his own works, bringing new life to the intellectual traditions of Alexandria. The Renaissance, that great flowering of human creativity, was in many ways built upon the intellectual foundations laid in Alexandria. While the physical library may have been lost, its intellectual legacy was far from forgotten. The flame of Alexandria's wisdom was carried forward, preserved in the minds of those who understood the power of knowledge. It flickered in the minds of the scholars who sought it, in the pages of the books they wrote, and in the ideas they passed down to the next generation. And though the library's physical structure was long gone, its influence remained etched in the very fabric of human thought. But the library's story did not stop with its resurrection in the Islamic world and later in Europe. The fragments of its wisdom also left a mark on the history of exploration and discovery. The idea of the library as a centre of human knowledge, a place where all the world's ideas could be brought together, inspired explorers, scientists and philosophers for centuries. The dream of the library, of collecting and preserving the world's wisdom, lived on in the work of great figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and later, in the Age of the Enlightenment, in the creation of modern libraries, museums and universities. Even today, the legacy of the Library of Alexandria continues to shape our understanding of knowledge. The concept of a universal library, a place where all the world's information could be collected and shared, is a dream that continues to inspire the creation of modern institutions like the internet, digital archives, and collaborative platforms for open source knowledge. While the world's greatest library may have burned long ago, the ideals that it embodied, the pursuit of knowledge, the sharing of wisdom, and the belief that the ideas of the past can guide us into the future, remain as relevant as ever. The echoes of the library also live on in the very way we think about knowledge itself. The idea that knowledge is not just an accumulation of facts, but something that must be nurtured, shared, and built upon, is at the heart of modern education. And while the Library of Alexandria may no longer stand as a physical monument to human intellect, it remains a symbol of the power of learning and the enduring legacy of intellectual curiosity. For all that has been lost, something profound remains. Alexandria's library may have crumbled under the weight of time, but its spirit is alive in every book we open, every idea we share, and every question we ask. Its story is not one of destruction, but of resilience. Though the flames may have consumed its scrolls, the knowledge they contained is still with us, scattered across the world in libraries, universities, and mines. The fire of Alexandria never truly went out. It simply spread, slowly, carefully, and with purpose, from one generation to the next. As we stand on the shores of the Mediterranean, looking out over the water that once kissed the great city's walls, we are reminded that knowledge is never truly lost. It is carried by the winds of time, scattered like seeds across the world. And as long as there are those who seek, who ask questions and search for answers, the spirit of the library will never fade. In the next chapter, we will continue to trace the journey of Alexandria's intellectual legacy, examining the ways in which the city's wisdom and knowledge found their way into the hands of those who would carry it forward. We will see how, despite the silences of history, the flame of the library continued to burn brightly in the minds of those who refused to let its light go out. For knowledge, once ignited, is a fire that can never truly be extinguished. It only waits for the next spark to bring it back to life, and in that light, the Library of Alexandria still shines. Chapter 8. The Archaeologists of Memory. Beneath the sands and dust of Alexandria, the echoes of a forgotten past continue to resonate. The walls of the library may have crumbled, its scrolls scattered or lost to time, but the spirit of its pursuit remains buried, waiting to be unearthed once more. In the quiet heart of modern Alexandria, as the sea whispers against the shores and the sun casts long shadows over the ancient streets, a different kind of excavation is taking place, not of treasure, but of memory. The archaeologists who sift through the layers of Alexandria's history are not simply searching for physical artifacts, but for the remnants of an intellectual tradition that has shaped the course of human thought. Beneath the modern city, buried under centuries of construction, lies the memory of the library, the knowledge it held, the scholars who once walked its halls, and the dream that it represented. Today, as the city of Alexandria continues to grow and evolve, the task of uncovering its past falls to those who seek to preserve not only its ruins, but its legacy. The work of archaeology is not just about unearthing ancient objects. It is about piecing together the story of a civilization, understanding how it lived, thought, and created. In Alexandria, the story of the library is a story of loss, but also of rebirth. The fragments of the library that remain are the inscriptions, the scrolls, the faint traces of intellectual pursuit, offer glimpses into a world long gone, but one that continues to influence our own. The archaeologists who work in Alexandria today are keenly aware of the weight of their task. They are not only excavating ancient ruins, they are searching for the threads that bind the past to the present. The Library of Alexandria, though gone, is not forgotten. Its impact on the world of thought, science, and philosophy is still felt in the universities and libraries of today. But in order to truly understand that legacy, we must look back, tracing the path of knowledge through the centuries and through the layers of history that have obscured it. One of the key sites that modern archaeologists have focused on is the location of the ancient Serapeum, the temple dedicated to the god Serapis that housed the final remnants of the library. This temple, which stood at the heart of the ancient city, was a symbolic centre of intellectual and religious power. After the decline of the library, the Serapeum became a sanctuary for the last of Alexandria's scholars, and a place where some of the library's scrolls were preserved. The Serapeum's destruction, ordered by the Christian Archbishop Theophilus in 391 CE, marked one of the final blows to Alexandria's intellectual heritage. But even after the Serapeum's destruction, Alexandria continued to be a centre of learning, though it was now a more fragmented and less open space for the exchange of ideas. Today, the remains of the Serapeum lie buried beneath the streets of Alexandria, hidden under layers of time and the expansion of the modern city. But through careful excavation, archaeologists have been able to uncover parts of the temple structure, including its grand staircase and parts of its interior walls. These fragments, though incomplete, offer a glimpse into the grandeur of the temple that once stood as a symbol of intellectual and spiritual harmony. The discovery of these fragments is not just a victory for archaeology, it is a reminder that the legacy of Alexandria's library and its intellectual pursuits did not die with its destruction. The knowledge that was once housed in the library lives on in the stones, the scrolls, and the stories of those who came after. It is through the work of archaeologists that we can begin to piece together the puzzle of Alexandria's past, understanding the complex interplay between culture, politics, and intellectual discovery that defined this ancient city. In addition to the Serapeum, modern archaeologists have also focused their attention on the ancient streets of Alexandria itself. Beneath the modern city, the ruins of the ancient city still lie in wait, offering clues about how the library and its intellectual legacy were integrated into the fabric of daily life. Excavations have uncovered the foundations of ancient buildings, inscriptions, and even fragments of books and scrolls that once filled the shelves of the library. One of the most significant discoveries was made in the 19th century, when archaeologists uncovered part of an ancient manuscript that had been buried in the sands of Alexandria for centuries. This manuscript, which contained a text written by the Greek philosopher and mathematician Euclid, is a rare and invaluable piece of history. Though it was only a fragment, its discovery brought the intellectual legacy of Alexandria into the modern world, proving that the knowledge of the ancients had not been entirely lost. While the Library of Alexandria may never be fully reconstructed, the efforts of archaeologists have allowed us to glimpse its grandeur and understand its significance. The fragments they uncover, the scrolls, the inscriptions, the artifacts, are more than just physical objects. They are windows into a world of thought and inquiry, a world where the boundaries between science, philosophy, and art were fluid, and where knowledge was pursued not for personal gain, but for the betterment of humanity. But the work of archaeologists is not just about uncovering the past, it is about preserving the future. The legacy of the Library of Alexandria, though scattered and fragmented, is still a living, breathing part of our world today. The ideals that it embodied, the pursuit of knowledge, the free exchange of ideas, and the belief in the power of human thought, continue to shape the way we understand the world and our place in it. The new Bibliotheca Alexandrina, built in 2002, stands as a testament to this enduring legacy. Though it is not a direct reproduction of the ancient library, it is a modern manifestation of the same ideals, a place where knowledge is shared, celebrated, and preserved. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina is not just a library, it is a symbol of the power of knowledge to transcend time and place, a bridge between the ancient and the modern, between the lost and the rediscovered. As we stand on the shores of the Mediterranean, gazing out over the city that once housed the greatest library in the ancient world, we are reminded that the story of Alexandria's library is not just a story of loss, but one of continuity. The flame that was ignited in the minds of those who studied in the library continues to burn brightly, carried forward by the work of scholars, archaeologists, and dreamers who refuse to let the light go out. The ruins of Alexandria, like the ruins of all great civilizations, remind us of the fragility of human achievement, but they also remind us of the enduring power of ideas. Though the walls of the library may be gone, the knowledge it contained has not vanished. It lives on in the work of those who continue to seek, to question, and to explore the mysteries of the world. And so, as the sun sets over the Mediterranean, casting its golden light over the ancient city, we take one final moment to reflect. The Library of Alexandria may have burned, but its legacy has never truly faded. The light of knowledge that it once carried still illuminates the world, carried forward by those who refuse to let the flame die. As you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, dear traveller, remember that the pursuit of knowledge is not bound by time or place. It is a journey that stretches across the ages, from the ancient scrolls of Alexandria to the digital archives of today. And as long as there are those who seek the truth, the spirit of the library will never truly fade. Good night, traveller. Let the echoes of Alexandria's wisdom guide you as you sleep, and may the flame of knowledge continue to burn brightly within you.